The December 19th, 2024 meeting of the Dexter Township Planning Commission will now please come to order. Just to introduce the Planning Commission to the audience. There's some chairs up here that are empty. I'm Marty Straub. To my left, your right, Chandra Hurd, Sean Smith, Steve Birch, Tom Lewis, Alicia Abbott, and Christy Mayer. If you would now please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Just as a first item, unofficial item of business, I'd like to welcome Sean Smith to the Planning Commission. You'll be a good asset, I'm sure, and hope you also enjoy your time on here. And also welcome Alicia Abbott, who's been on the Planning Commission, but now is filling a different role, having been elected trustee. Congratulations on that, and appointed Tuesday night to represent the Board of Trustees on Planning Commission. It's explaining, a little bit of our history. Most of us have been on here for 6 or fewer years. Steve Birch has been around for a long time, was chair for a long time. He was chair when I got on here. And then earlier this year it was, right? Got reappointed? Yes. And I also said that somebody told me that Judge Dexter originally appointed Tom Lewis. I don't know if that's, I don't know if that's entirely accurate, but that's what I had been told.
That goes back a ways, huh?
Conflict of interest review. Anybody have any conflict with anything that's on our agenda tonight? Seeing none. Approval of the agenda. A couple of things. First of all, there are a lot of discussion items tonight. There isn't really anything that we're planning on taking action on, not in these items. But whatever you'd like to do with them, there's some logic maybe in kind of triaging these in order of priority. I don't think we need to have vast discussion that, takes us to an unreasonable hour. But if there's some of these that you want to take in a different order, so we get to those first, or we can take them as they come, as they're ordered on here, and just, call time if you think we've taken them far enough. So if we want to reorder them, this would be the time to do it. But what's your pleasure? All right, we'll just kind of go through them. And the other thing, we have received privileged communication from the township attorney, and she's not here to meet with. I don't expect that she would need to be here. She transmitted what she had to say to us in writing on paper. We've got that. We're able to read that. So I do not see the necessity in going into closed session. We would talk amongst ourselves about what she wrote, and if we thought we needed to do that, let's bring that up as an item at the end of the meeting, and she would be able to be here at the next meeting where we would be in action mode for any of these items that we want to forward. So if that makes sense to everybody, on that basis, I don't see any modifications to the agenda are needed. Anybody have a different opinion? All right. Brings us to public comment. If the record would please reflect that we opened public comment at 6:04, and there are no members of the public here wanting to speak, so we will close it also at 6:04. Public hearings, we have none tonight. Action items, the first one is the annual report. Is there anything you wanted to tell us on that, or is it just a written transmittal? I really only had one question on it, I think. It was my opinion, it was a good document. Thank you. I'm not sure that I remember, seeing that level of orderly detail on what had been done over the past year. So thank you for that.
Luckily, quite a bit of it came from
Minutes from your previous meeting, so the text amendments that were, that was pretty much different from. So yeah, this is just a sort of recap of the year for the commission that goes to the board of trustees as a file item. And it's required, annually by the Michigan Planning and Enabling Act. If there's any other information you can in here or we could be, we can get customized, before it's submitted.
Great. Anybody have any questions or comments?
The only comment I had is on packet page number 6, the property owner initiated text amendments. The 2 bullet points, well, the second bullet point seems like it's missing something at the beginning of that sentence, maybe using the standards, or
Oh,
maybe it
yeah.
should be combined with the sentence before that some way.
I think that was, yeah. Very cool.
Okay.
Anybody have anything else? The only kind of question I had on it was it includes ZBA activities, and I don't have a problem with that being all in one document. Just to be clear, we are co-equal boards, not one subservient to the other.
The model that I used to draft this one from included it as well.
All right.
Yeah.
I think it's good and comprehensive, but it just, I feel a little bit weird about planning commission transmitting the document that has ZBA, but I also don't recall, I guess I could look in the ZBA bylaws if that's laid out, but anyhow, you'll take care of that appropriately, however that ought to be. So I guess if we have no other comments for purposes of,
I just had
yes, ma'am.
One clarification on recommendations. To offer training for planning commissioners for our bylaws. I think my recollection is that is a mandatory requirement in our bylaws, and it's 4 hours of training. Is that per year? Okay, it might just want to add per year, I guess. But I think it's a good recommendation.
Yeah, I saw that and.
Yeah, good.
Didn't know we had to do 4 hours each year, so.
I just have one more little comment. Packet page number 4, under site plans. The final site plan amendment for Cornman Farms. I think it's supposed to be located on the north side of Island Lake Road between Dexter Pinckney Road and Wiley Road, since Island Lake
Oh,
Road
you're
runs east-west. Just a
Yeah, good point.
clarification of that.
The first bullet.
Right.
Anybody have anything else? So since this is going to be an official transmittal from Planning Commission to the Township Board, I think it would be appropriate for somebody to move that this document with the amendments that we just mentioned be transmitted to the Township Board. Could we have?
Mr. Chair, so moved.
Moved by Birch. Do we have support?
I'll support, Mayor.
Moved by Birch, support by Mayor. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Second item of action item 7B is the 2025 calendar, which I had a question or comment on, I guess, but anybody else have anything first?
I do have a question,
Sure.
Mr. Chair. Why did the calendar not start until April, when technically the planning commission year corresponds to a calendar year?
I think the answer to that is this follows the township's fiscal year. Anybody know that for sure?
It does.
All right. Which also then means that the calendar for this year covered through the end of March 2025, the township's official calendar. That, does that satisfy that?
Thank you, yes.
Right. The couple of things I wondered about, first of all, Tuesday, May 27, 2025, Planning Commission meeting. That's the day after Memorial Day. Does that cause anybody any issues if you were trying to extend that week into a week of vacation or anything? Anybody? I mean, not that we're signing up for, oh yeah, we're for sure gonna be there, but if somebody knew for sure that that was an issue. All right, and then the other one that I was wondering about, Tuesday, November 25, that is week of Thanksgiving, which this year we didn't move that, we canceled the regular November meeting this year, right? Because there were enough people that were planning on being gone that would have created an issue. Anybody have a feeling for that, or asking staff if we? It's hard to predict whether we need a November meeting, but should we, for the official calendar, plan on that a different day or week in November? And then we kind of see when we get there whether that's necessary.
Yes, you're welcome to do that, to change the date at this point. And then that'll go into the board's calendar for the year.
All right, now that would be the fourth Tuesday, the normal planning commission meeting, and it appears as though the first, second, and third meetings, or Tuesdays, I mean, are tied up. The first is ZBA. The third is, of course, the regular trustees meeting. I'm not sure. I thought somebody said that local roads committee may not be meeting frequently or not meeting on Tuesdays or something. I'm not sure I remember correctly. I wouldn't want to, try to double book, but maybe that's something, you guys could just do offline and use your judgment. If that looks like that would be an open date that local roads isn't really meeting, you could schedule planning commission for there or for then, and we just roll with it. We deal with it when it comes.
Well, on the 11th is the Veterans Day. So I don't know if that's important to anyone.
Oh,
Bring that up, so.
Yeah, I am kind of attuned to Veterans Day. I'm not attuned to the government observance of it, though. Is the township open, or do they observe on Monday, or how will that work?
Is the township open on Veterans Day in November? I don't remember if it was opened.
Not sure if that's one that federally gets moved to a Monday. I do not know.
Well, we could do similar to what we did for this week. We could just, instead of the 25th of November, the 20th is a Thursday. And if everybody's open to that.
Yeah, we could do something like that.
Catches people.
Mr. Chair, November 2024, on the 11th, the township hall was closed, which I'm assuming was an observance of that.
Okay.
Day.
It was that day though, this being Tuesday.
Yeah. and-
If they have us close the Tuesday.
Yeah, I don't know how that would work, but I don't have any issue with you guys figuring it out and just you let us know. But I think there would be some merit in moving it off of November 25th.
Cute.
Being that it was so popular anyway.
Yes.
Looking at the November 2025 calendar, right now, there would be nothing on November 11th.
Okay. And do you want a motion out of us? To me, this is more, you're telling us where these dates would normally fall. And, we deal with whatever the township adopts as their official calendar. You've got our input. But we could formalize that if you think it's necessary. I think you asked the question, we kind of collectively gave the answer.
The memo we got says we should make a motion.
Thank you for keeping me square. So in that case, if
Well,
we're gonna
that's-
make this official, who,
Well, should we also talk about the 23rd of December, though? I mean, do we make one motion to cover both dates, I assume?
that's a good one, and I don't know why that one did not jump out at me. It was an issue this year because it would have fallen on the 24th, which, you know, is why we're meeting now. I don't know. I don't know if the 23rd is
The 23rd is a Wednesday, not a Tuesday. The 22nd is the.
22nd, I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know that that would be a problem for anybody.
This schedule says it's. And that's incorrect. So I'm looking at.
I'm looking at,
2025.
yeah.
Yeah, 'cause these are all-
2025, yeah, it's
These all follow.
Tuesday, yeah.
Well, no, something is wrong here. What day is December 20, I'm sorry, December 2nd, 2025? What day of the week is that?
It's Tuesday.
Okay, so then December, the next week is gonna be the 9th, not the 10th. And the next week then will be the 16th, that's correct. And the next one is the 23rd, which would be correct. Did I do that right?
Yes.
It's just math. I think there's only one of these then that would be an error. And that's, now there may be other errors in here, but at least as far as December goes. December Board of Review on that Tuesday. So one of those is wrong. Either Board of Review is on Wednesday, the 10th, or Tuesday, the 9th, but there is no Tuesday, the 10th. Not our business, but we might as well catch it here. All right. Anybody have any other input on that?
Do people have issues with 2 days before Thanksgiving? Do a lot of people travel? I mean, I don't have an issue with that.
Yeah, this year it was a
And-
problem. I don't know that it's gonna be an issue for me next year, but I think that we have 3 people, I think, that had an issue this year.
All right, because I know November 11th, it would be in Veterans Day. It will be observed on the 11th, for sure. It
Yeah,
won't be
so if
moved
the
to
township's
Monday.
closed, we don't wanna.
Okay, so we're
schedule
not
the meeting.
considering that date at this time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that wouldn't make sense to me. But if Michael and Megan figure that out and just, you know, put whatever's appropriate on the calendar. I think we've resolved the conflict that we see. And if we get to November and there's some other issue or we're all caught up, we don't need a meeting in November, we'll deal with that then.
Or maybe we should just make it the 20th.
Pardon me?
Just make the November meeting on the 20th instead of the
Thursday.
So do the
20th, yeah.
Thursday.
Thursday, the 20th.
I'm okay with whatever you guys want to do. Any advice from staff?
No, you know, unless there's a conflict in the room, something like that.
All right, so let's do that. Our recommendation will be the 20th. We can formalize that in a motion. And if that turns out that that's a conflict, then just, you know, do whatever, and we will obviously conform with the township calendar.
Should we make the December meeting the 18th, which would be Thursday, the 18th? Just in case we need a meeting in December.
Yeah, that's kind of what we are doing right now, isn't it? So that seems to work okay. That sounds like a good idea.
Both dates into one motion.
Yes. Yep, so if we're ready, the motion that I would request is that if the planning commission wishes to change the dates, make a motion as the time of the- okay, that the planning commission makes a request to the township board to establish the November planning commission meeting to be 11/20,
Yes,
is that correct? Thursday, November 20,
yes.
and the December planning commission meeting to be Thursday, December 18th, 2025. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay, anybody care to move that motion?
I'll move it, Mayor.
Moved by Mayor,
support.
support by Hurd. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say yes.
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 Opposed, no. Motion carried. Thank you. Now we get into the discussion items, the first of which is non-conforming contiguous lots zoning ordinance amendments from the September meeting. Now, there was a bit of a, I don't know if I'd call it a technicality that the township attorney picked up on, which is the subject of the privileged communication. So that, as far as I'm concerned, stands for, stands on its own. But the issues that we were trying to resolve with this amendment, I don't, you have, either of you have something you want to present to us on this? We've,
Basically, section of the zoning ordinance that is confusing. And so we're attempting through the amendment to have it be more clear. We had some language that was suggested in September. Also in September, it was suggested to have some diagrams, and those were included in the revised amendments that were sent to you. The text remained the same. You got the privileged communication from the attorney, who also has offered to meet with staff and consultants in order to further improve upon the amendments. So if you wanted to postpone this to your January meeting, where you could have some revised amendment, revised language, and also that the township attorney would be in attendance and be requested, that might be an appropriate action at this time.
are you recommending, or are you suggesting with that statement that we would pass this on for discussion in January? Okay, so it would not be an action item, no public hearing or any of that in January. We discuss it again with the revised wording. And I still don't think that that's worth bringing the township attorney out to a meeting for, unless somebody thinks that that we need to have some questions answered. I think the memo answered the question about the issue that she had caught, and that's that, as far as I'm concerned. Anybody have a different opinion? Okay, given that, would you see an issue with us just moving it tonight for action public hearing in at the January meeting?
If you're comfortable that you would be looking at new language, that would be in the public hearing that you would probably see 2 weeks before. And that would be available in the public as well.
It doesn't seem to me that there's anything substantive in that. There's just some kind of cleanup.
Do we have any idea how many lots are like this in the township? I mean, is it hundreds or is it, 20 or? Cause I didn't know if it's just the kind of thing where like someone actually will have an interest in this and want to talk about it, or?
I would say that based on my experience being here a little over a year and assisting the township, it's probably at least dozens.
And mostly the lakefront lots?
Mostly the lakefront lots. There's a surprising number that are where people own across the road.
They own their parcel and then there's a road and then they own across the road.
Right.
Okay. And across the road is probably on the lake or behind them?
It's
Either
been
or?
either or.
Okay. And is there, just in terms of like record keeping, can the township just look at these two lots, which I assume have separate parcel ID numbers, and just say, you know, for common ownership, let's just merge them and make them one parcel, or do you have to have a hearing for that? Or like go to the, how would that work?
So the township, as far as I'm aware, cannot initiate that and make people merge the properties.
Okay,
You could, if there was a site plan on, I've seen it in zoning ordinances where a site plan comes through and it straddles two properties. Then the municipality has put it in their zoning, they had to combine the properties, and that's an administrative function
okay,
by the township per state law. So also, what this kind of brings up is a larger issue that you wouldn't necessarily look at here, but this might be, I think it was flagged in the annual report as something to look at, is that in your lake residential, the majority of your parcels are non-conforming in terms of lot width and lot size. And there are options to change the minimum lot size or the minimum lot width to bring the majority of those into conformity, but what that would take is some mapping analysis, and there would be some hard decisions about that. What as, I know I myself, and I think Michael, you have been also curious as to have those discussions happened in the past, because you've had these non-conformities, not only in this zoning ordinance that was adopted in 2020, but also in the zoning ordinance before that. And has there ever been any discussions of quote unquote right sizing the minimum lot width and the minimum lot size so that the majority of your lake residential lots are conforming rather than non-conforming? But having gone through that with other lakefront communities, we're not going to eliminate all the non-conformities. There's always going to be some that are skinned out. And the other thing is when you reduce that minimum lot width and lot size, what you can set up is that there can be more splits. And so then you're increasing your density in those lakefront. You can potentially increase the density in those lakefront neighborhoods. And that's something that in discussions with your elected and appointed officials has been made clear that that was never the intent of the lake residential zoning, was to, that it was felt like the density that it's at is appropriate, but we wouldn't want to see more houses being allowed.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have a question that you've implied that it's going to be a fairly involved process to go through what suggested here, right sizing our lakefront lots, et cetera. And then with the caveat of openness to the potential of splits. As your recommendation as our consultant, do you think this is worth the advantage of doing this as beneficial rather than continuing on with just merely grandfathered nonconformities?
Planning consultant and looking at best planning practices, yes, I think it would be worth the time and effort to quote unquote right size. However, if you as a municipality have attempted to do that before and found it difficult, unwieldy, impossible, then wouldn't want to revisit that if you had had that experience.
But that was not really the intent of what's before us, right? This was to clarify, because there's, I think, a pretty strong argument to be made that the way that it was written, well, could be misinterpreted. It did result in at least one issue. So what's before us is to try to make the ordinance easier to read. But then, yeah, that next step, okay, now that we've got it easier to read, okay, so what? If nobody does anything with it, why does it even need to be easier to read? But that would seem to me to be maybe a direction for the township board or supervisor, executive committee to take up, and how they want to allocate staff resources. You know, if they want to pursue it, but at least this is the framework and You know, maybe it would be when people are issuing permits or those types of things, might be easier for somebody to know what that was intended for.
Well, Mr. Chair, since you kind of directed that to me, I understand what you were saying. But in my study of this and going back and reading the original ordinance as written that this was extracted from, if we ignore the deletion of the word sold, I'm not sure that I find this any more understandable than the other ordinance. It's very subjective.
Yeah, I think I get what you mean, because the concept is even a little, you know, a little. We don't deal with that sort of thing, you know, it's a little bit weird to us. To me, I think the couple of things that are very helpful in this, well, first of all, just, I don't know, the keywords, the headings, whatever you call them, which you have done consistently throughout, we'll see a lot more of those tonight. I think that helps somebody, they don't have to read a whole sentence, they can see, oh, that's about division, that's about permit. But I think it's the clause added in here, unless exempt under item 3 of this subsection. As I recall, the confusion arose, we have 3A not applicable, and then we've got 3 items enumerated. Is it, you gotta have both of the first 2 or the third? It was almost a logic puzzle. Now, I'm not saying that I stated that just right. In fact, the reverse could have been the case, but it was kind of like a logic puzzle where it was not clear under what conditions. So the clause added at the end of paragraph B about contiguous, unless exempt under item 3 of this subsection, and then item 3 clarifies or cleans up the wording a bit. So I think that was the main thing that it was, and I'm not saying that this makes it crystal clear. But I think it does make it less of a logic puzzle, less subject to interpretation. I think that's where, I mean, I might be fuzzy on the details, but I think that's where the issue came up.
Current ordinance, if you look, there are 5 items listed, but the first 3 are and, and the last 2 are or. And they're all with the same, they all have the same hierarchy in terms of the bullets. But really, it's if 1, 2, 3, any of those are, if all of those are true, or if B is true or C is true. So it is a logic puzzle. It's a difficult situation. Another option would be to break out. You can, instead of saying calling them contiguous lots, you could break it out that these are the rules for common ownership of the roads in between, and these are the rules for when they're next door to each other. But then what they have to do is, the rules for those right now are essentially the same. And so then you would be repeating those rules under both sections, but you could do that. And I think the township attorney has some suggestions and offered to meet with staff and consultants in early January, and there might be, she might have some ideas on how to make it clearer as well.
Because there are a couple of dozen examples of parcels, separate parcels with their own legal description, IDs and everything, with the right of way between, and several as well, where one single parcel has a right of way between. And that makes a difference in terms of figuring out permitting dimensions, stuff like that.
And to that point, and Commissioner Mayor's point earlier, I did have an experience, I don't know, 30+ years ago, where 2 contiguous pieces of property, ownership transferred at different times, but after some period of time, all of a sudden, they did not have 2 separate legal descriptions anymore. They became combined. And I don't know if that was done at the township level, county level. I don't know. Now, I'm guessing that however that happened, it doesn't happen that way automatically anymore. Otherwise, these likely would have been taken care of. And by taken care of, I mean, combined, because they are contiguous under the same ownership. So I don't know. I mean, I tossed that out there. I'm not sure it's worth anything. Just that at one time, in one instance, decades ago, it did happen automatically. It was not requested by the owner. I didn't make anything clearer, did I? Hey, what should anybody like to do with this? You want to move it for discussion, January or some other time? Or do we want to move it for action in January? And I say January, maybe we should kind of reevaluate at the end of the night how we get through the rest of these, because this many discussion items at this meeting, maybe a challenge. This many public hearings and action items are probably unmanageable in a single meeting. So that would be a case of triaging these. If this isn't a burning thing, I think we are at no risk of a similar type of mistake being made in the near future. At least we can hold that one off. So then maybe the question is, do you want to discuss it again, or the next time we see it, do we want to take action on it?
Mr. Chair, under the circumstances and considering, at least for myself, how challenging this change may be, I would move that this item be deferred to the January meeting, with the hopes that in the interim, the township attorney and the staff could give us a recommendation of something that will be more understandable, at least my little mind.
I
Your
would say-
support?
I find this very confusing.
Somebody want to support
I'll
that
support that.
motion? Moved by Bruce, support by Mayor. And given the discussion, maybe if we could have a couple of examples of how this gets interpreted, items, whatever they were, 1, 2, 3, ABC. It's 8, I think it's 3, ABC. How kind of the, both and, or the ifs play into it. How it could be misinterpreted, and how kind of reordering the hierarchy a little bit, how we were intending for it to be interpreted. A graphic maybe would help that out.
No, there's no issue with bringing actual pieces, so.
Yeah, that would be great, yeah. That sounds real good.
I apologize, being kind of new, I'm not always. You always remember the rules on when you can't talk and can't say things and when
You can
statements
pretty
count
much
and
talk
don't.
whatever you want.
I would comment that not only being new to the board and not familiar with this particular example, but then trying to read it from a very just black and white. And I do have a background in applying things like this. It is confusing. And I feel like the edits actually compound the issue
Okay.
because of the double negatives, as you mentioned, the logic, the dislogic, the ands and the ors, when you're trying to put an exemption to
Mhm.
an exclusion, which is meant to be an inclusion with multiple and statements in between, just becomes very confusing. So I would like to see clarity in the language. I think the suggestion that you made of bringing examples, in those examples, I think what would be nice to see is examples of why they're being brought. And there's 3 that come to mind, 2 which are already listed here, being the continuous frontage, 2 lots that are next to each other. Second example being separated by a right of way. The third example, which I'm suspecting is what leads to some of these issues, is maybe someone has 10 parcels that are all glued together and they're trying to break them up into 3 family pieces to a compound. And so you're not only joining, but you're actually dividing in the process also. And the reason that I ask that way is both the continuous frontage and the joining. You do have opportunities to do what you mentioned of joining parcels. But my understanding is that parcels on opposite sides of a right of way cannot be joined because there's a right of way that goes in between them. So does that, well, A, is that presumption correct? But then B, if it is, does that change the application of this for that third example?
Yeah, I think the presumption is not correct because you could have a big tract of land that had, in fact, we probably have some with utility rights of way that could bisect those, and yet it's still now it might get, I ought to defer to Michael, who's an expert in such things, but I don't, maybe if it's a road right away, that's treated differently, but especially if you look at a plat map or something, those are connected across the roads, and the owners are just granting rights to the public to travel over their property.
For utilities, they're typically easements, not rights of way necessarily.
Okay,
Yeah,
And I'm thinking specifically of the right of way example, and you mentioned before the lake properties, which quite often is exactly that. People on either side of a right of way will own both parcels, but there is the right of way, which is platted, and is, well, not only platted, but is the access for people further down the road for them. And that was the scenario where they couldn't be joined. And to be honest, I'm coming back to some of those other applications where then all of a sudden that changes your lot coverage
Mhm.
calculations and
Yeah.
stuff. And
Yeah.
that's where it gets really complex, especially in the lakes districts.
and given your comments, in addition to some examples of, how this may be incorrectly and then correctly applied, maybe kind of a logic diagram, so you get to these, ifs and ands. And if that's not asking too much, we might even want to incorporate that, so it's clear to everybody, ever after, but you get to this point, did you meet that condition? Yes, no. That might help us, and if it helps us, it would probably help users of the document later on.
that's the type of diagram that I think that you were describing, Mr. Chair. We can also bring specific instances, and how this applies, because, we see it probably at least once a week. And then also in which situations where those lots could be combined and which situations where they could not. Because I believe, Planning Commissioner Smith, you were correct that if it is a public right of way and the 2 parcels are across the public right of way, you could combine them. However, if it's a private road, then that might, I know that that's a different situation, because that's a private easement. Where often people own to the middle of that private road. But that also might be different based on each individual private road. And you have a lot of old subdivisions. I think we've seen plats that were from the
19s, 20s.
Yeah.
Along the lakes.
And sometimes the roads were meant to be committed to the road commission. But they never became public, so they're default private roads. But they don't have a lot of the things around them that if a private road was enacted today, that you would.
And I'm thinking that this comes back to the tangential conversation earlier about reviewing like the lakes, lots, and et cetera for doing the right sizing. There's going to be so many exceptions and so many variations and alternates, and exactly like you're raising with private, whether it's a by definition right of way or an easement, then you also run into whether or not those legal changes were made, that even if it was a private right of way, but it was never transferred. All those oddities just is one of the purposes of the ZBA. to take into account that.
Yeah.
So I think one of the questions I had, which you just answered, was how often do you run into these? If you're running into it one time a week, it is fairly common then, and yes, we should try and find a solution here that gets people through most of those, but understanding that maybe the goal is to try and find a solution that works for 50 to 75%, knowing that there's some amount that we'll never be able to address. But that's the purpose of, again, the appeals, the ZBA.
If I could add, as you were saying ZBA, the thought was passing through my mind, some of what you were just describing, there have been cases before the ZBA where some of these other lots contiguous had been included in the calculation that
Sure.
either it may not have allowed a clean calculation for lot coverage or something like that, but it made the it made the excursion, it made the appeal, less than what it might have been. And I remember under David Rohr, there would always be the request. Not sure if we were able to make it a condition, but there would be the request that, okay, we've already taken that into account and allow you to do what you came before us tonight asking. But now we want you to just combine that. So we've already accounted for that. Want to make sure that you don't then sell that. And even though that might be too small and it's non-conforming, you can't technically do anything with it. You could sell it to the neighbor. Now this becomes a greater non-conformance than it was before. So yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. There are all kinds of details that we probably haven't accounted for nearly all of them.
And I felt that the intention, at least of what I was seeing in this, is to really just try and categorize these as what is conforming and what is non-conforming. And so if these definitions and descriptions help to ease that, then that is the goal of this. And then that does make it successful language. But it's just trying to make it easier to understand versus trying to write language that works for everything. I think this is really about legibility, comprehension, therefore ease of use and applicability to the public. Then again, that's when the planning professionals can help support this process.
So it sounds like we should have a more comprehensive review of this section. I think the immediate goal was, let's try to eliminate some degree of ambiguity, which would allow somebody to take a look at, oh, this lot, yeah, it's legally non-conforming, but it was pre-existing. So yeah, you ought to be able to build on it, but oops, it actually was contiguous to a parcel that you also owned that already had a dwelling unit on it, which also is non-conforming and will be more non-conforming if this gets peeled off. Now, that's not the exact scenario maybe, but not saying this is stopgap, but this would, what I think, what's before us tonight. I mean, these are some great points that have been brought up. This whole thing maybe needs to get a deeper dive, but to clarify what we have and reorder it that way, so it's not so confusing for township staff when they go to issue a permit. So I don't know. I mean, that's we can bring it back for more discussion. Thing I'm kind of wondering now is, should it be an entire rewrite? Should it be a cleanup? And then the next step is, okay, we realize that there's some deficiencies in this. Even when we clean this up a bit, even if we put together a logic diagram. Yeah, is that really what we want in the end? And perhaps it is not. Perhaps this is one small step and then, a much larger step after further consultation.
Not having been party to all of the history to this, but if I could make the suggestion that based on what we're doing already, which I believe is There's additional language coming in for clarity. We've asked for some additional material to help foster those discussions, that the motions that are on the table right now to continue this discussion with that additional material at the next meeting is the proper direction to keep moving. And then at that next meeting and that discussion, if this hasn't begun to gel, then we could ask that fundamental question of, is this the right direction?
Yep, I think that makes sense.
I agree.
No.
So we
Mr.
have
Chair,
a,
call the question.
we have a motion before us, moved by Birch, support by Mayor, to defer this item for discussion at the January Planning Commission meeting.
With the inclusion of additional information as requested.
Good one. Thank you. All those in favor, please say yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Okay, brings us to item B, home occupations. Staff like to present that.
Request. In reviewing the zoning ordinance, it was noted that home occupations require a zoning permit. In discussion with township officials, the ordinance review committee, looking at what actually your home occupations are, it seemed to make a lot of sense. To require that for a home occupation, in our current memo, we included the definition of what a home occupation is, so you can have that context. And just to note, that are allowed as accessory permitted uses in the ag district, rural residential, lake residential, and resource conservation zoning districts. Home occupations, even if you did not require the zoning permit, this home occupations would still have to meet the requirements in section 1702F. Stating a nuisance, then the township would use those regulations to bring them into compliance or have that home occupation cease. So there would still be protections in terms of making sure that there's compliance, and then also something that the township could do is regularly inform people through, we've talked about this for other things, through the newsletter or just having information on the website, is that these are things that if you're having a home occupation, you should be aware of. And these are the rules. So what we simply suggested is that in table 25.1, that home occupation, instead of a zoning permit being required, that no permit is required, and then footnotes B and C apply like any of the other uses in that table where no permit is required. So the appropriate action would be to tell us what you think that you want. To say, no, we don't want to initiate it, we think it's fine, or to move this forward either with changes or as presented for a public.
Ms. Birch. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Although I personally support the idea of removing the requirement of a permit for home occupations, there are a couple of areas I would like some clarification. Number one, in the preamble, this was taken from the definitions in our zoning ordinance. I noted that pet grooming is not allowed, and personal service such as, I don't know that it exists in Dexter Township, but I have encountered it in other townships, home massage and barber services being done in a home. Question, is it our intention to prohibit those three activities in our zoning ordinance?
It's your intention, I say currently you do. By definition of what a home occupation is. So that those are specifically not allowed as home occupation.
Okay, thank you. And my second point, table 18.1, I'm looking at bullet on page 16. Table 18.1 would still require one parking place per non-resident employee of the home occupation. However, that contradicts with statement in A, parent 1, parent C, home occupation shall only consist of employees residing on the premises.
Not much of that review, so I think we could eliminate, we could add to the amendment to eliminate that parking space for one non-resident employee in table 18.1, since they're not allowed to have employees.
Well, thank you. And my original statement of supporting the no permit for a home occupation stands. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sir, and I assume that when this gets combined into the master document, the error reference source not found, that gets resolved, that just nothing we should be concerned about. Anybody have anything else? What would the group like to do with this? Would we be ready to deal with this for action in our January meeting, have the public hearing? All right, anybody care to make that into a motion? Or not?
I guess can I ask one other question
Sure.
about pet boarding services? Because I know, like, I have an account with rover.com. Like, what if my dog, like the person that was providing Rover services takes my dog and keeps it in their home for like a week? Is that a pet boarding service, which would be outlawed? Or is it not, is a port bedding like a kennel?
A pet boarding center is like a kennel.
Okay.
I think that the kennel with the pet boarding center is defined in the definitions, but we can double check that when we're bringing it back.
Okay,
And then,
Like maybe this is that rover.com commercial, you're paying for that or?
it's kind of like Airbnb for.
I
finding
was
a
just gonna
pet
say,
sitter.
yeah, sounds like there's some short-term rental analogies there. It's really a matter of
Yeah.
how long.
It's basically you can find a pet sitter. People sign up there as pet sitters. And then when you need one, you go on Rover and you get your match, or maybe it's more like, I've never used a dating site, but it's kind of like a dating site for a pet sitter that you're trying to find one.
and we've had clients where it was brought up that there's a online service where people rent their cars.
Oh, yeah.
Just pick them up at their driveways, also at their pools. Or.
Pool? Is that what you said?
Yes,
Pool? Huh.
they're
Yeah.
home, they have a pool at their home and they rent it for other people to have a party there.
Oh my
Or
gosh.
maybe they have a barn that's filled with, games and pinball machines and things like that. And so one of the things I would. We're never gonna outzone the internet. So to make sure that things are flat enough to deal with those issues, and when it rises to the level of nuisance, then we can deal with it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody care to move this item to our January meeting for public hearing and action?
So moved.
That moved by Abbott? Is there support?
I'll support Mayor.
Moved by Abbott, support by Mayor. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say yes.
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 Opposed, no. Motion carried. Item C, public notice and site plans. So this. Oh, this is a great example, by the way, also of, putting headings or keywords out there so somebody can kind of scan the ordinance and pick up what they're looking for without having to try to read paragraphs to get that information. But this one, I think, mainly came about because it was determined that Dexter Township might be a little bit out of sync with common practices today.
Yes, and you're requiring a public hearing for something that is not required in state law. So currently, you require a public hearing for any site plan that comes before you, planning commission. You also, as required by the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, you have those for special land uses, rezonings, or zoning tax amendment. The problem with having the public notice for a site plan is that a site plan is an administrative function where you have non-discretionary set standards. So if it meets all of your regulations and rules, you, planning commission, have to approve it. And we have a site back into state law where you can look at that. When you have the public hearing and everybody within 300 feet is notified, you give people the expectation that when they come, they can influence the decision. And so had flagged that in our technical review that happened last November, November of 2023, as something to look at. And the ordinance review committee looked at it, and also at that point in time, looked at also administrative site plan, because we have the experience of going through one of those where you require notice of an administrative decision. And again, if somebody's, the public was told, the public came and shared what they thought, but some, while some of their things we were empathetic to, some of the things that they were requesting weren't in our regulations, and so couldn't be asked of the applicant. And then also, I think that the chair can attest to what your requirements require right under the history of site plan is that the planning and zoning director and the planning commission chair make an administrative decision together. And they're the two who make it. And then I think at the chair's request, looking at maybe the more appropriate person who's not the planning and zoning director should be the township supervisor.
Yeah, if I could jump in at that point, I didn't feel comfortable that a non-professional so far removed from the process, yeah. You know, we all are gonna be into the zoning ordinance, so we would have presumably more familiarity with it, but it just didn't seem right, and I don't know what's done in other places, but the chair of the planning commission doesn't really have any power, authority on an individual basis. I would rather, just little old me saying this, I would rather that our professionals in consultation or concurrence with an elected official who is directly accountable to the people and not, okay, talking about, I'm gonna say, you know, buried a couple of levels down in bureaucracy. We don't really have bureaucracy in Dexter Township, but it just struck me that way. And I think there could be arguments to be made, that it was fine the way it is. So if anybody has an issue with it, that's how it got there. I'm sorry, you had more?
I think that was the context of that's the reason for the specific requirements. I feel like you had a couple of things that you had noted that if this was to go through, oh,
I go better go down. Section 2H, no. Substance wise.
All right, anybody, I'm sorry, do you have something else? Anybody have anything? I've got something that's kind of obscure. I don't want to forget, but anybody who's got something else, please
Well,
jump in.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Joe.
what you just brought up, the lack of H there under section 2, this is, and now I'm looking at packet page 24, section 2. I'm not sure if this reads right correctly. Modify section 27.06D to remove the requirement for a public hearing and insert the requirement to notice within 300 feet following final site plan approval. It reads funny. I don't know what that's referring to.
Okay,
You're
so-
gonna insert a requirement to notice within 300 feet, and I think that's what is missing in the H. That doesn't read right, because I think you're taking that, you're removing that.
Okay. Yeah, I apologize. So, we should take out and insert the requirement to notice within 300 feet following the final site plan approval.
I was just wondering if I was reading
Yeah.
that incorrectly or
No,
something.
You weren't. That was
Okay.
a mistake. What had happened is that the ordinance review committee, we talked about when you remove that public hearing, then having a notice that when now after the final site plan approval, to let people know that the decision had happened. And then upon further consideration, it was thought that that would maybe be provoking, and again, it's not required by state law, and you're not doing it for anything else. So that was just something that was from a previous draft that was at the ordinance review committee.
Okay. And then my second comment, if we went ahead and chose to eliminate that public hearing for our site plan, would the public still be able to comment on the site plan during the public comment period? Because there's, okay. Because I understand your statement about the public comment should not influence a decision if it meets all of the standards for review. However, sometimes I think, we have a fairly educated public out there, and they provide us some insight that we hadn't even thought of. And it may be positive and it may be negative, but it's always good to get that feedback from the public, because sometimes that helps the developer even to become a better neighbor to these residents when they hear that feedback, and maybe that they can incorporate something into the site plan that makes them a better neighbor. And, as long as we can still get those public comments some way, somehow, because.
Yeah.
Sure.
I agree with that, because earlier you had said that, it needs to be approved if it meets the requirements. But maybe somebody brings up will say to us, well, we need to change our requirements, maybe that something that should be required, like we need to amend our ordinance. So I think it would be good to get that public comment in there somehow, even if it doesn't influence the immediate matter before us. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Anybody have anything else?
May I just ask a clarification question here? An administrative review. Is there always an opportunity for public comment on an administrative review?
In other communities,
Our community,
in your community, it requires it for the administrative site plan. But for something like, a zoning approval of a single family house. No. Or there are other the township issued zoning permits for fences, sheds, signs,
Garages, decks, patios.
garages, decks, patios, single family houses, all of which, don't require an administrative site plan, do require a zoning permit, do not have public comment as part of it, public notice.
Okay, so if I'm understanding that correctly, then for the Dexter Township processes, the administrative element of it isn't necessarily the black and white doesn't meet the regulations, therefore it can be moved through. It is the site plan definition element of it, which is what gives the opportunity for public input.
It gives the opportunity for public notice.
No public notice, and then based upon that public notice, the public is able to come to a meeting in the open session then?
Not administrative site. So an administrative site plan is just the planning and zoning director and the planning commission chair making a decision. It's not required to be in an open meeting.
Well, just to interject, it's not so much a decision as a finding of fact.
So, finding fact, and to be frank, I've been doing planning consulting for over 20 years, and worked with dozens of zoning ordinance. I've never seen where an administrative function required a public notice, for an administrative site plan. So to me, when I read that, I thought there's a story there as to why that was enacted in 2020. Or maybe there is a distrust of staff at that time, or felt that extra transparency was needed or something.
Okay, so the requirement for public notice is just again a notification process so that affected neighbors are aware that a site plan has been submitted. But there isn't necessarily an opportunity for them to give input. Okay. Well, that answers my question. Thank you.
Anybody have anything else?
I have, can I just add one
Yes,
more
ma'am.
thing to my comment? On packet page 29, section 5, modify section 31.07 to remove administrative site plans from notice requirements. And then the sentence below that, notice shall be given for all public hearings. Is administrative adjustments supposed to be kept in there? Because it is, and maybe you can give an example of what an administrative adjustment is. Because on the following page, it is included to be struck out with the administrative site plan. And I know administrative adjustment is defined in the definition section, but I didn't, like, I'm like, what's a good example of that? Dealing with the development standards.
Oh. Again, that.
Or it's even bigger.
So in terms of.
I'm guessing administrative adjustments would be struck out along with administrative site plans. But I just didn't understand what administrative adjustment what referred to exactly.
Usually refers to something that's like a minor amendment to the site plan. That then the planning and zoning director could wait. They could do on their own, or they could do as an administrative site plan in conjunction with the planning commission chair. But also that's not a common term that you find in zoning.
Right.
Anything else? The item I had is not especially germane to this topic, but it did kind of strike me that it's something that we should address in our bylaws. So on packet page 25, page 3 of the document, F2 signatures, blah, 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 signed by the planning commission chair or acting chair and director of. There's no provision for an acting chair. There's a chair, there's a vice chair who acts in the absence of the chair. But we don't have any provision for anything beyond that. And you got a seven member body, 4 people as a quorum. It could be that we have absences or vacancies in chair and vice chair. And then what are you going to do? Not have a meeting? So we're probably due for a review of our bylaws anyhow. We could sometime, I prefer early in 2025, have a bylaw review and maybe we could clean this up a bit. It seems like there ought to be a provision. Well, for a while, we did not have a chair. The vice chair was acting. And there wasn't another provision should the vice chair be gone. So by however that math works out, if you had those 2 people gone, you've got 5 people ready to have a meeting, but we don't actually have a provision. So it seems like it ought to be something like if in the absence of chair and vice chair, that the rest of the group can elect somebody to run the meeting that night. You wouldn't expect, I wouldn't expect line of succession to go to, oh, now on top of everything else, we expect the secretary to run the meeting. But even if so, you could still have chair, vice chair, secretary not at a meeting and 4 people constitute a quorum ready to go and public isn't served that night. So anyhow, not to beat that one any further, is just kind of points out what I think is a deficiency in our bylaws that we can address. Like I say, preferably fairly early in the new year. Now, on the document itself, does the group want to move this to our January meeting for public hearing and action? You want to move it to some other meeting, or do you want to discuss it further into the future?
I would say we could move it to January.
Is that a motion?
Yes, I'll move that.
Excellent. Is there support?
Support by Birch.
Moved by Mayor, supported by Birch to move this to the January meeting for a public hearing and action. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Next item is keeping of animals, and that is mostly, I guess, because I was concerned with the way the current, I'm finally not calling it the new zoning ordinance anymore, I guess. The current zoning ordinance was originally written. I had some issues with it at the time. Those were fixed up, but partially at least, my overall issue was that in rural residential, if you have 10 acres or more, being able to operate that as a farm, just like you would in agricultural zoning, 10 acres or more, would be supportive of the township's goal to enhance and preserve the rural character, the agricultural nature of the township, et cetera. And we were overly restrictive in the way that was written, according to me. It was needed to be clarified better. The document that staff has given us, as far as my issues go, I've got a couple of questions on the equivalency perhaps, but that accomplishes what I thought we needed to accomplish from the time the current zoning ordinance was originally adopted. So except for a technicality or two here, I have no philosophical issue with how this is written. It clearly delineates the 10+ acres in RR, and we have a lot of 10+ acres in RR. So anyhow, that's how this got here. Anybody have any comments, concerns at this point?
Well, I'm sure there are farms that are between 8 and just under 10 acres.
So anything that's a farm operation falls under right to farm.
Okay,
So they would be under 10 acres, they're, no matter what size they are. And so they-
Right to farm does not establish a size,
Oh, no.
Okay.
And in
but
fact,
you do have to follow the general accepted agricultural management practices regardless of size then. Yeah.
yes. Township doesn't regulate uses. That power has been taken away
Yeah.
from municipalities by the right to farm.
okay.
So mainly, so let me jump in if I'm saying something wrong. Mainly, this addresses what is commonly referred to as hobby farm. That does not mean that a hobby farm is not also commercial, but the primary purpose is not commercial. I think it cleans that up.
So under the Farm Act, it's that if it's a commercial operation or they intend to be if they intend to be a commercial operation. So if they're doing any marketing or anything of that nature. There's a lot of case law around the Right to Farm Act. And so so just know that, it's a hobby farm may qualify as a farm operation under the Right to Farm Act. I think this would be more whether someone's living on a large lot and they're keeping chickens for their own use. Or the sheep or goats, again, for their own use. They're not selling milk, they're not selling wool, they're not slaughtering it and selling the meat. They're using them all for their own private use, or they're giving it away.
If nobody has anything immediate, I'll just kind of jump in with, in a way, it's picky. In a way, I'm still kind of hung up over the math. I think this is a great step in the right direction. I could live with it the way it is, but it does jump out at me, the equivalency. So on page 4 of the document, packet page number 37, the table. Chickens, turkey, rabbit, other fowl, 4 animals per acre. And then down below, horses, ponies, reindeer, cattle, bison, elk, swine. 1 animal per acre. So the question that just jumps out at me is, how are 4 rabbits equivalent to a horse, a bison, a cow, a swine? I could have, not that my wife would let me, but I could have 4 rabbits in my living room, and there's no way in the world that that is equivalent to a horse. So, and I don't have the answer for what it should be. It just seems like, not sure that this is the right number.
Michigan State Statute publication. And going from there, if you go to GAMS, you would see that for, I think it's like 20 chickens per 1 horse. And so you get pretty intense pretty quick if you use those type of equivalencies. We were trying to take things from source where they consulted veterinarians, but I think also the reason that those 4 animals per acre is much less than, let's say, 1 cattle, bison, or horse is that, again, looking to maintain a residential nature, and not getting pretty intense pretty quick. And again, those are for things that are under 10 acres.
And I realize that people raise, I'm kind of hung up on the rabbit part of it, I guess. I realize that people raise rabbits commercially, they raise them for meat, they raise them for other than, fluffy little pets. You can go to the 4-H fair, you can go to the Chelsea Fair, you can see numerous examples of that. But I equate rabbit to kind of like, large cat. So maybe I'm just unnecessarily hung up over this. Is there a reason, is there a reason that we have to have rabbit listed there? I mean,
There's-
turkeys. I don't want to go down into the rabbit hole, but I could probably kind of spiral off into, okay, now let's talk about chickens. How many chickens is equivalent to a cat? Maybe for my purposes, rabbit doesn't need to be on the chart. And then I don't care about, okay, a horse and a bison and a pig. Those do strike me as being kind of equivalent. I just can't jump to the rabbit part of it from there.
Like, do you think that people don't raise rabbits?
People do raise rabbits.
Okay.
I just don't think that if we're gonna have rabbit on the chart, that 4 rabbits is equivalent to a pig. 40 rabbits might be. 4 isn't equivalent to a pig, a horse, a bison, certainly not an elk. I mean, elk is the size of some SUVs. And I don't see nuisance value in rabbits, but yeah, I am aware that they are raised for commercial purposes for meat and maybe because of that belong on the chart. But I think I could also argue that, okay, if somebody had so many rabbits that it became a nuisance, township could deal with them under nuisance, not mathematically. I don't want somebody calling a neighbor, oh, guy next to me has 5 rabbits, come bust them. That just seems kind of,
Well, how would he know? I mean, they don't bark.
you would have to see them hopping around, minding their own business, I guess. I don't know. But I don't want to just go hog wild on this. But does anybody? I don't know. This is one of those things that strikes me that, that doesn't seem right. I don't have the answer.
You could direct us to go back and look more into rabbits and then just treat chickens, turkeys and other fowl as their own.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea, and I would be fine if you came up with a different number for rabbits, or just said, you know what? We don't have a big rabbit problem in the township, and until we do, maybe we shouldn't try to regulate rabbits so closely. I'm okay, either way.
Can I make an additional suggestion
Yes, please.
while we're going along here? The pygmy and Nigerian goats, what makes them so different than a regular goat that they're 1 animal per acre, where a regular goat is 2 animals per acre?
Wow.
Where a pygmy or Nigerian are smaller than, I mean, I grew up raising goats. And we had the Alpine goats and the Toggenburgs, and they're a lot bigger than the pygmy. So seems like those should be combined or treated equally, perhaps.
Could I ask or add to that, just a fundamental question of, is the right approach to limit the number of animals versus just trying to rely on nuisance? Because this gets into, are we defining what's the right number of animals? And then my one question that popped up was animal welfare, is maybe 2 goats don't get along and you have to have an odd number of goats or something. I mean, at what point are we trying to prescribe something that's not necessarily within our realm?
Yeah, I think that gets into the GAMPS a bit, which 10 acres and above isn't so much of an issue, but I think that does raise a good point. And we've had similar discussions about, oh, well, 10 acres, well, why not 9? Why not 8.5? So I think that does kind of get into that issue more. How closely do we want to define these things? There maybe just ought to be a minimum size for keeping of any what you call a typical domestic animal. I am aware of complaints where people have had a couple of horses on a couple of acres and when you come down to it, nothing is an issue until it encroaches upon the neighbors. And I think the township has some role in protecting those neighbors and not requiring neighbors to call and make a complaint on everything. You know, we have rules and regulations in effect that regulate junk vehicles, stuff like that, so. Yeah, I don't know where to draw the line. I think that's a real good question.
Mr. Chair,
Well,
Sir,
without a limit, we may not be able to define a nuisance. Also,
yeah,
Yeah,
but
and the intent of these. The intent of the keeping of animals is to. Minimize the impacts, the negative impacts that are possible. When keeping animals, and those are noise. Disposal of, noise, waste, and sometimes if they're not animal safety, but also environmental impacts of waste and food and whatnot is not properly cared for. And as Michael said, without these regulations, it's difficult often to enforce. And also then you're also giving residents what their parameters are. Because we do occasionally get calls of how many chickens can I have, or whatnot. And it's more people who are calling because they're looking to have these things and they want to know what the rules are before they go forward. The sticky part is really with these is what's a farm operation under right to farm and what's not. And that difference is whether it's commercial in nature under right to farm act or whether they intend to be commercial in nature. And so, so we can go, I'm hearing a lot of concerns about where these numbers have come from. We can go back and define those, look at those further and give you the direct sources. And then come back, but I think what would be beneficial for us to know is this the right approach in terms of having it by the minimum lot area for the first animal and then the maximum number of animals per acre.
I think it is better than what we have now. And then we kind of get into the discussion, well, are we gonna take a step in the right direction that maybe fixes an issue? Or do we want to wait and try to get the perfect solution? And I kind of subscribe to the old saying, whatever it is, don't let, perfect get in the way of, or don't get, however that goes. So it seems like we're ready to take a step in the right direction, and it might be one of those things that we ought to then take up next year for further study and discussion and see. Now, maybe the big question is, so how many complaints do we get?
Any, I haven't encountered any.
I had one call,
Which,
just for sort of definition.
okay,
Not that I don't like what that person is doing, but what can they?
All right. Now, maybe from that, I don't know, this is an entirely logical conclusion, but I would kind of be led to believe that, well, it probably means that there's a lot of stuff going on out there, almost like short-term rentals, where it's not a thing until somebody complains about it. In which case, going back to my rabbits, we shouldn't make somebody who has 5 rabbits, have to go underground. We might as well bring the township ordinance up to whatever is reasonable. How do you define reasonable?
Mr. Chair,
Sir.
you've touched on by reasonable. a quandary that I have. Because one of the advantages of living in semi-rural Michigan is that I get to see a lot of critters. And right now, without invitation, I regularly get visited by 5 rabbits and 9 deer. This is in Carriage
All at the
Hills.
same time?
No, they.
Okay, because because otherwise somebody ought to be writing you up for that.
The deer, yes.
Hmm.
I will have 9 deer out there strolling under my bird feeders in the
Wow.
mornings.
Are they wild rabbits or,
Yes, wow.
okay, as opposed to someone's pet?
No,
rabbits
that's what I
or
said,
dogs, okay.
without invitation.
Yeah.
I'm not raising them intentionally.
I mean, I know someone that has chickens. And the neighbor wasn't happy with the chickens roaming freely, so they discussed it and then the person that has the chickens penned them. So, I mean, I think that's, there might be problems out there, but neighbors are able to agree on what should happen. And it's when they can't agree that then they would turn to you and they would have some standards.
We have standards and we have standards in there currently.
Right.
It was just asked that they be made clear and
Yeah, I think this is a big improvement over what we have now. Now, if it's not perfect, my request would be that we go forward with it, and as we get the time and ambition, we can try to perfect it.
One
But
question.
you
if
still
I
want
could-
something done with the rabbits.
I think, yes, I think that's kind of a straightforward thing. You either, figure out that there's a more appropriate number, take rabbits out altogether. And it's for the rest of it. I live on acreage. I don't have anybody, within several hundred feet of me. But if I was in a lot, I wouldn't necessarily care if my neighbor had, horses, cows. I would care a lot, if they had pigs and I'm on the downwind side of it and, one rooster a quarter of a mile away might wake me up before I want to. So it's hard to establish equivalency. I think we're not really addressing equivalency in the nuisance sense. It's just, what seems reasonable. If somebody wants to have some critters, what seems reasonable. So for the most part, people can do what they want with their property, but we as a township are not setting up a situation that could quickly become adversarial with neighbors that maybe doesn't have anything to do with the critters that they keep even. Just, I got a thing, I'm gonna complain.
Does the Right to Farm Act or GAMS have an animal unit chart anymore?
Yeah.
Would that be of any assistance?
we looked at the animal unit chart and, again, it's much more intensive than the base regulations that you had. So, and then looking at what M2 has published under the agricultural life, those were usually a bit less than what the GAMS are. The other thing about the GAMS is that they can change
Yearly?
every year, yeah. Because they're adjusted by an appointed commission, at AmDart. So, a bit of a moving target.
No, I was just thinking that could potentially give insight as to some numbers, not necessarily definitive numbers, but.
We did that, we looked at those at the, or if we're gonna change back, we can bring that chart to you as a reference point.
Just as a kind of the equivalency question, not necessarily distinct numbers.
Yeah, as I recollect, it's like one horse, one cow equals, I think it was 50 chickens. I mean, it was a lot of chickens.
Chickens aren't bad, the roosters are the ones that are problem.
But we'll, if you, whatever you choose to do, if you choose this to move forward, we can move that chart.
Anybody have any strong feelings on this one way or the other? I pretty much stated my position. I think it would be good for us to clean this up. Clean up our current situation. I think this does this about 99% at least. And sets a little better tone for what we want to support, promote as a township. So what should the group like to do with this? We can deep
I
six it, we can pass it on for further discussion, we can pass it on for action at whichever meeting you'd like.
I wouldn't have a problem with this going forward, and then if staff has additional input regarding the equivalency numbers, that could be taken under
Be easy
consideration
to
at the
deal
public
with at
hearing.
that time, yeah. Yeah, it makes sense to me. Anybody else?
Mr. Lewis, was that a motion?
Yes, sir.
I will support that motion.
Moved by Lewis, supported by Birch, that we move this along for action, public hearing and action. Want to do that in our January meeting?
I guess I have a question about that. What are we already doing in January? Because maybe we should push it to February.
Well, yeah, because we have
This is already,
home occupations for action, public
Yeah.
notice of site plans for action. How many public hearings we want to have in one night?
It's hard to answer because there may be some things that I think that probably doesn't generate a lot of interest, but home occupations, for example, might be kind of a thing that, oh my gosh, what's the township trying to do? And that could be, a half an hour, 45 minutes of public comment even. So, yeah, that's
Well, the keeping
I
of animals,
appreciate
I
the
think
point.
could be
Yeah, I
a
think
That's
topic.
critical.
right,
Yeah.
Because you may have people out there that have 5 chickens or 6 chickens on 1 acre, and they're not gonna be happy to
Yeah.
have to get rid of 2, so. I feel like that could be a tad contentious.
So to the mover and supporter of that, is that okay? Move this along for public hearing and action at our February meeting?
Acceptable to me.
Absolutely.
All right, any further discussion? All those in favor, please say yes.
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 Opposed, no. Motion's carried. Brings us up to item E, wetland setback, and I guess I'd kind of present this one too, in that it had been suggested to me that our minimum is not appropriate. But as you can see from what's before us, there are different interpretations, like different definitions. What is the actual setback? Is it straight line distance? Should it be different for a slope? And while it may be that, and then also, well, is it setback or is it buffer, which can be different things too. So it just, I get it that what we have may not seem adequate, but I think there's some details here that may suggest that we want to go about it in a whole different way. So what would you like to do?
Mr. Chair, if I may give you the benefit of my experience when I
Please.
was on the planning commission before, this turned out to be a really challenging problem. Define what is a wetland. At what time of the year is it a wetland? Is it a recognized wetland, or is it something that somebody is claiming as a wetland? And again, the state of Michigan, as I recall, had the way the state defines wetlands is much less restrictive than the way we as a township wanted to define a wetland. And so we finally got to 10 feet as the least of all evils.
Yeah.
When we set a 10-foot setback from wetlands. When we considered these other factors, in fact, there's as I recall, a ditch alongside Wiley Road at Island Lake, that is a wetland only 3 months of the year. And so how do we handle that versus in our zoning ordinance? And then North Lake also was a particularly challenging area because of the little isthmuses and openings. If we went any bigger than 10 feet of wetland protected area, that was in somebody's backyard, I mean, their back porch, for heaven's sake. So I'm bringing this up just to emphasize that we want to be pretty careful when we start expanding our wetland definition and setback requirements.
And I guess in the context of that, in this time since the zoning ordinance, current zoning ordinance was adopted, I think I personally have received one comment on it. So, and then along the lines of complications that you're talking about, when MC went through and gave us what's before us, yeah, it's far from straightforward. Maybe our best action is do nothing. You know, has anything really, really been harmed by what we have? Maybe the better question is, will the next request somebody have, maybe, with the township in a position where, oh, darn, wish we would have expanded that a bit. And I didn't, give you guys a chance if you had something else to kind of present that.
How the shed comes in and they're subject to that same setback of 10 feet. So if it shows on map Washtenaw, the wetland layer, if it shows that there is a wetland that's possibly on that parcel, what we ask is that they either get a wetland survey or they go through, it's called WIPS, I think, Eagle, where Eagle will do an assessment for the resident, and it seems to be a fairly new program. We've had at least one time where that was done. A house started to build, somebody contested whether it was a wetland or not, whether they were encroaching into the wetland or violating the wetland setback. Eagle came out and looked at it and said, actually, you know, it's fine. But County Commissioner Birch, your statement about what's a wetland and when is a wetland, and how wetlands can grow and shrink also, is a fair statement. I think from an environmental perspective, usually more is more. So the further back you can get, the less contamination that can possibly go in. Ideally, it's a vegetated setback, but with your small lakefront, your lake residential lots, 10 feet is often makes a building envelope, you know, very awkward. And I think, Michael, you could attest to
For sure,
that.
that's come up a lot.
And obviously you have the ZBA for certain situations, but you wouldn't necessarily want to create this. That's been one of the discussion points, I think, throughout when we were talking about this at the ordinance review committee, was if you have 25 feet in like residential, how many lots does that affect, and possibly would send things to ZBA or make people non-conforming with what the existing structures that they have.
And we already have a 50-foot water body setback for lakes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
or that's proportional to the existing houses.
If I may, item 4 in the packet references Eagle processes regarding wetlands construction. Is there anything in our current zoning code that addresses what you can be doing in that wetland? I mean, we talked about a setback, which typically means stay away. But maybe sorry, I have a question and a comment. Question being, is there anything that addresses wetlands construction? Comment being, is there maybe a gray approach that we can look at this where it's not necessarily a black and white, this is the line, but it's a matter of when you're within X distance, then you do Y. If you're within Z distance, then you do A. And again, basing that on either what Eagle is currently doing or what Washtenaw County is doing. I'm thinking in my mind also back to the whole lakes setbacks and the shoreland. And the things that are going on right now with the concepts of how to better build adjacent to water. So maybe there is something that looks at how to better build with a wetland.
So in terms of regulations, you have a section 2306 wetlands. Item A deals with identification. B deals with delineation, so if there's identification in question or contested. And then it requires a wetland delineation by a professional engineer and surveyor or. And then the only regulation is setbacks, and that they need to be at least 10 feet. From wetlands in all districts, driveways, boardwalks may be located closer if the wetland permit has been issued by the Eagle. There are some wetlands that Eagle does not regulate. Typically, those are 5 acres or less. If they're not associated with water body or water course. Other municipalities require wetland permits. If someone is going to drain or build in a wetland that's not regulated by Eagle. Typically what they have is either they have a wetland board that evaluates them. And then by state law though, if it's associated with if you were to set that up, the planning commission would need to be the wetland board for anything that's associated with a site plan.
And then corollary question to that. Wetlands are not considered water bodies, correct? Isn't there something within the township? The discussion about water body. I thought I heard the term water body come up at some point about trying to do something regarding water bodies. I guess what I'm wondering is if that is the case, because wetlands is such a large discussion, especially because of the seasonality and because of their relationship to water, would that maybe be a more appropriate place for this conversation to continue?
Might be, I don't know what the priorities of the township board are in terms of that. I think there were discussions about, and it's in the master plan to look at controlling runoff and maybe having ordinance about what people could use on their lawns in terms of fertilizers and things like that. The other thing that I will say though is that Washtenaw County, so if you had a new development come in, it would be subject to the Washtenaw County Water Resources Commission and their review in terms of drainage and stormwater. And Washtenaw County is one of it is a model for the state in terms of having some of the best regulations about stormwater in terms of using best practices in terms of plans to have rain gardens or filtering natural systems for stormwater, and actually other counties that use Washtenaw County's bringing water resources commissioners regulations as a model. So for something other than a single family house, those regulations kick in. Also, if something is above 20% of impervious surface with any improvement, it's required by the zoning ordinance to have a stormwater review by the township engineer. And so I don't know how many of the single family homes are for zoning permits that come through that we send to the engineer.
I believe I have an example.
So maybe like 5 to 10%. But again, anything ever increases above 20% impervious surface, and impervious surface is any sidewalk, any deck, any building, then it goes to the township engineer, and they have often required things like, we need you to put a rain garden in if you're gonna put this deck in, in order to clean and filter the water before it gets to the lake. So you have a lot of regulations already that go a bit above and beyond that some other communities. But you don't have a wetlands board or wetland permit if somebody was going to build in a non-regulated or do an activity in a non-regulated wetland.
It just, I mean, compared to the information that we are provided, where, you know, most people are like 20 to 30, and ours is 10, we do seem pretty minimal compared to other jurisdictions around us.
It might be worth exploring, with the township attorney, whether the wetland setback would be different for different zoning districts. Again, because Lake Residential is rather small, and there would maybe create some problems with that 25 feet. But for your rural residential and resource conservation, districts with the large lot sizes there, that shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, to both of those points, there could be some unintended consequences where all of a sudden ZBA is jammed up with, you know, the setback just got a lot bigger. I think that's a good point. You could run it by the township attorney. I'd have I don't know, a little bit of philosophical issue, I guess, that, well, we're gonna let it be 10 feet in Lake Residential because we create this ZBA problem or some other unintended consequence if we made it what it should be. But for everything else, maybe it could be same approach, just different parameters that for existing, we acknowledge that this is what it is, but for new construction, it needs to be whatever number somebody determines is appropriate, you know, something more than 10 feet.
It's really what you as the planning commission want to take it. If you want to continue to explore this, if you want to give us some direction in terms of what research and look at further, whether you think it's part of a larger conversation that's part of other issues that the township board's taking up. Since we got to a point at the ordinance review committee where 10 feet, 25 feet.
Yeah.
And felt like the planning commission, it was at the point where it needed to work input about how to go forward, if to go forward with this.
And that's kind of the basic question. Another one of these things, okay, 10 feet maybe doesn't seem right. What's the right number? Well, darn, I don't know. But maybe we just need to see, is there consensus around this group that, okay, yeah, 10 feet maybe doesn't seem right. It's worth looking into. Or it would also be okay if we determine, you know what, we got a lot of stuff coming at us next year. This is something that we ought to kind of set aside for a while. It doesn't seem to be a problem presently, but we may recognize that it's out of step, if you want to look at it that way, with what others have in their ordinances. So how would the group like to handle this?
I really liked Megan's suggestion that we could pick a setback based on the category, like Lake Residential. Maybe we keep it at 10 feet just because those lots are really small, and maybe rural residential, we move it out further. So that might be I think that might be worth exploring.
Yeah. Without knowing what the impact would be on Lake Residential, it's really hard to,
Yeah.
for me to make a decision on that,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it could have a huge
Create
impact.
one problem or one maybe not problem for an administrative problem,
Right.
turn it into something else. Yeah.
Recently suggested it's something for township attorneys. I haven't seen in any zoning ordinance where a wetland or an actual nature district has been differentiated. by zoning district. So I suspect that there is a reason why, and we want
Hmm.
their input.
Is it also, is it possible to get somebody to talk to us about, like a wetland expert? Because I know you have experience with this, but like, I'm sure there's like people that study it for a living. So, because I know they're very important, but I don't actually understand how they operate or, you know, what would be harmed by either what's benefited by a bigger setback or harmed by a 10-foot, potentially.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I have also been told that you can have one that is so big that that creates its own issues that are not necessarily promoting, you know, good land use practices by the same person who said that, yeah, 10 doesn't seem like enough.
Well, isn't the, Land Preservation Committee using a, consultant who's actually an expert in this that could maybe come and talk to us about? Yeah, I
Yeah.
think his
Mm.
name is Barry.
Oh, very long.
Is that one of his special, I mean, would that be something he's knowledgeable about?
He's more knowledgeable about agricultural preservation, but we can ask.
I was just trying to think of somebody who
Yeah.
might be more, who might be able to come to a meeting and talk to us.
What, I think somebody through OHM, they have environmental engineers on staff. Who would have it.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when I'm driving through the township, ours or other people, and you see a house and you think, man, that person's living in a swamp. Like, how can they put up with that? Must be mosquitoes or bugs. And you wonder, like, why is that house there? But, you know, the people build all sorts of places. So I would just like to know, like, what are the ramifications of having a house there?
Yeah, and the other resource that we did tap is the, Karen River Watershed Conservancy. Council, thank you.
Almost seems like there's a behavior component about this, though. I don't know, sometimes I don't know that the structure placement is the critical factor. It's what you're doing on the property and how close, if you're storing gasoline containers outside next to a piece of wetland, that's a whole lot worse than having my house
Great
or
point.
my deck 10 feet away. You know, where I'm, so there's a behavior component here that seems to be.
There are people at Eagles who look at that specifically. There was a question recently that came up that, you know, somebody was complaining about oil drums close to a water body in the township moving around. And talked to the owner, that was trying to look at the situation, and she, you know, recommended how to handle that, where to put things, and, you know, that would prevent spills, that kind of thing. So that, we certainly have that expertise.
Yeah, and in terms of something like, you would call that a performance standard, so where you store things.
Or
it's not-
nuisance, or,
Yeah, no, not necessarily nuisance. Sometimes those are better not in the zoning ordinance. Because the zoning ordinance, is bound by the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, which then also, for anything dimensional, it can go to the zoning board of appeals. So, for instance, if you're saying you need to store certain types of chemicals 25 feet away from any water body, and that's something that's a must and you don't want any exceptions to. The zoning ordinance isn't a great place to put it because. But as a general ordinance or a police power ordinance, it has, those exceptions are not built in. So you often see that, and like you'll often see for specifically around wetlands. If a municipality has chosen to have a wetland permit, they won't have it in their zoning ordinance. They'll have a separate ordinance that's about wetlands, or they might have a separate ordinance also about tree preservation. Where those might be cross-referenced in the zoning ordinance for certain things, but those are a standalone ordinance, so somebody couldn't go to the zoning board of appeals and ask for an exception on anything dimensional.
So is it the consensus of the group that we just ask staff to take all of our comments under advisement and I would say at, your own pace, whatever workflow seems to be appropriate, you just get back with us. I don't consider that we need a motion for that. We're not asking for this to get carried forward for action, but if anybody disagrees with that, feel free to make a motion and we'll deal with it. All right, hearing none. Does that give you enough for what you need on us from that for now? Great, thank you. And that is the end of our discussion items, right? Brings us up to item 9, approval of planning commission minutes from October 22nd, and I will start off with an apology. Janice, you gave me a copy of this when I was in here for some other meeting after that. I don't know if it was township board meeting or what. I forgot about it. I read them through when I picked up the packet and then realized partway through that October 22nd, you gave me a copy, which I didn't read. So all of these things that I'm about to bring up, I could have just gotten back to you and you could have had that all taken care of before this copy. So I've got, I think 0 substantive comments on it, but I've got a lot of typo type things, punctuation, things that, picked up off the transcript, maybe sounded like, but it wasn't. So anyhow, I've got all of that. I will give you a copy so you can see where they are for purposes of us approving the minutes with these modifications. I can just rattle them off. Christie probably has some because you're usually catching things that I don't. But go ahead.
I just thought that Janice did an incredible job on these minutes.
Yeah.
Because that was such a long meeting and so many people
Yeah.
talked and it just really, I
Lot of
thought was just a
comments.
great recap of all that transpired that evening. I thought you did a great job.
Oh, for, as I said, purposes of, if we're gonna move approval with modifications, just so you know, the modifications that I'm gonna give Janice. I'm not gonna go through and say what paragraph, what line and all of that, just in the interest of time, although if you want me to, stop me. But I've got something that says id ID should have been S. Townships ought to be apostrophe S in that case. There's a hi that I think it's supposed to be his. There's a no that should be not. Today's should be apostrophe S. Update should be updated. There's a stray O that I think should be a not. There's an uppercase A that should be a lowercase a. There's a 2TOO that should be a 2TO. There's a stray apostrophe. There's an it apostrophe that I think should be its IT apostrophe S. And I think that's everything I had, but all minor. I echo the previous comments that was a long darn meeting with a lot of comments, and really appreciate the way you captured the essence of, in a few lines, somebody's maybe 5 minutes worth of comments to us. So thank you for that. Wow.
Normally I can do minutes in 3.
Wow. So anybody have anything else, anything they wanted
I just have
changed up on
I
these?
have 2 and you could just put them on yours
Okay.
then. Okay. On page 66 of the packet, the comment that begins Marcy Amin lives next door. The last sentence.
Oh,
last
nuts.
phrase
I'm
should
sorry,
be-
which, I think I made my corrections on the one that didn't come in the packet, because I've got both copies with me. So I don't have packet number on here. Which page of the minutes was it?
It's the second page of the minutes,
Okay.
page 2 of 8.
All right, thank you. Yep, okay.
It
What
should
was
be-
it?
It should be renters, not enters, second to the last line. And renters do not know the rules.
Renters do not know property line. Is that what you're looking at? Right.
Yeah.
You know what? I
Very
might, is
last sentence there.
this what yours looks like?
And it's renters. Renters, not enters.
Oh, got it. Yeah, okay.
And then on page 5 of 8, this just says alley, alley, it should be alley.
Oh, thank you. Yep. Okay. Anybody else have anything?
Is that somebody's comment?
Yeah, Amy Bennett
the
on
applicant.
page 5 of 8.
Not in an alley or easement.
Alley should have an E between, it should be ALLEY.
Yeah, and
Spelled
spell
correct.
check would not have picked that up, yeah. Yeah, great. Okay, with that and hearing no other requested modifications, could we have a motion to approve the planning commission meeting minutes of the October 22nd, 2024 meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Birch, supported by Abbott. Any further discussion? Hearing as amended, thank you. All those in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. In correspondence, in our packet, we had a couple of items of correspondence. Is there anything that either of you would like to address on those, or anything else that falls in correspondence category that we didn't get ahead of time?
The short-term rental correspondence that you have happened after, after you received a whole bunch already. This came after that. That's all. So you're not receiving duplicate, papers. And the planning journal for battery energy storage systems, the document, actually first came in the mail. The one you have the ladies here. You have a paper copy. Figured, and it was a planning commission.
I downloaded it today. It's all 66 pages.
All right, if there's no more correspondence, Township Board of Trustees update, have anything for us?
We just had a meeting 2 days ago. And we approved all the appointments to the boards and the committees, so you'll see changes like Sean here. And so they also approved the holiday schedule. So y'all have that. I think that's really about it. I mean, that was the.
All right, thank you. Anyone have any questions for trustee Abbott? All right, brings us to concerns of planning commission members, director of planning and zoning. Let's start with our recording secretary, please. Janice, anything for us?
No, other than
That doesn't sound like a convincing. no.
I knew with the Zoom.
How's that working out? Oh, oh. Is that
There.
functioned pretty well through the meeting though?
Touch.
Yeah, gotcha.
Here, I messed it up, but yeah. It's great.
Anything else for us?
No. Good meeting. Thank you for the comments. I appreciate that.
Let's-
I love doing this. You just know.
I'm glad for that. Absolutely. Jump across the room.
Yeah, we also included in your packet the monthly report for November. Pretty much has a couple of things under short-term rental joint board is capital and we mentioned that the supervisor currently looking for the one member that we propose as that one. 。 On this, I think there's the first item on page 4. Received and processed 8 single-family zoning permit applications. One of them, the purchaser actually backed out, so we'll probably be receiving a new application for that site. You know, if the new buyer wants a different model or something like that.
How many homes are they allowed to put? What's the maximum number of homes?
They're working about 50 lots altogether.
Seems like it was 48, I'm thinking.
Yeah. So, 8. That's it, you know, in terms of ones that are going.
I just wanted to add that, we got a revised site plan for the consumer gate, ballot station. And they still are not complying with, the township regulations in terms of fences. But some of that, the township regulations in the front yard is 4 feet, which is not something that's in compliance with the guidelines that the utilities have from the federal government. So in talking to the supervisor and the planning commission chair, it seems like the best way to get this situation resolved and move it forward is to look at zoning ordinance amendments for section 1706D, which deal with electrical or gas substations. You have an electrical substation. And then you have a gate valve station, which is this consumer site. So you have 2 of those in the township, and likely if there were any improvements to the electrical substation, they would have the same fencing issues as well. What we'd like to do is to bring this for discussion in January, have consumers come as well, so they can give input as to what their restrictions are. We've gotten very minimal things from them in terms of writing. And then look to have that move along as amendments, hopefully public hearing in February, getting some amendments to the township board by March. And I want to emphasize that in no way, shape, or form should you look at those zoning ordinance amendments and merely trying to make conforming or legal what consumers is proposing. It's more looking at what are the federal regulations for these types of uses, how your current regulations are in conflict with them, and then what are the best regulations in order to match what utilities need to do in terms of meeting the safety standards that they're bound to, but also preserving the character of the township. So I would hope that we could add that to the agenda in January.
And also, so you listed a couple of utility installations. There's another one on Quigley Road. There might be more that I'm not aware of, but if you can also take a look at the one on Quigley Road, appears to be gas. Not that I've paid a lot of attention to it. It's not the same scale. And I suppose therefore not the same scope as the one on Territorial. But yeah, we probably ought to make sure we've got all of these utility installations corralled so we don't have unintended consequences while we're focused on 1 or 2 that, oh nuts, we just affected that one. Thank you. Yeah, that'd be great.
Of each place, and we at least have a contact.
So should we expect in January that there will be some background information for discussion? Not ready for action on anything in January, just kind of the initial pursuit of what are we going to do to kind of make all this harmonious. Okay.
And you're hoping to have like, move that from discussion to action for February.
Yes.
All right, anything else from two of you?
Sure.
All right, thank you. Christie,
I'm okay, thank you.
Alicia,
I'm great.
Tom? Good. Steve?
Al, I was officially reappointed. And I am glad to be back working with you, and you're stuck with me for another about 3 years.
Thank you for re-upping. Got plans for you.
Yeah, yes.
Anything else?
Not
All
here.
right, Sean?
Nothing other than to say thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to being part of this.
Well, thank you for joining us. It's, appreciate your inputs. It's gonna be, valuable. It's gonna be a good group. Sandra?
I have nothing.
I have just one, well, I've got two things, I guess, but, one. We had talked about, somebody brought up, I think, months ago, that with all the zoning ordinance amendments, at some point, we should probably have the township reprint for our purposes. The updated version, I think, is always available on the website, right? But for purposes of us dragging something around, now that we are reconstituted, be without changes for, changes in our makeup presumably for at least another year. But at some point, wherever you guys think is appropriate, that we'll just kind of, okay, at this point, we're gonna print out new copies for everybody. And obviously, there will be changes in the coming year. Okay,
It was a previous meeting, because the agreement was that in January, we would print out new zoning ordinances for you.
all right.
So those. to you for next.
But some of the stuff that we're talking about now that we're gonna have public hearing on in January, some of that is, several pages of new zoning or zoning ordinance changes, so if you think it's worthwhile and we wait until after that, whatever you think is best, but I think pretty much it's time that we get some new copies. All right. Thank you. The only other thing I guess I had is just thank you to everybody. This is the end of the year. All of a sudden, a lot of activity this year. And while we won't be doing things like master plan, and I don't think anybody sees anything on the horizon that was the scope of the renewable energy ordinance. There's going to be a lot of stuff. So thank you for all of your past efforts, and thank you for your future efforts not yet realized. Anybody have anything else? Second call for public comment at 8:23. Still no public in attendance, so we'll open and close that at 8:23. Future agenda items, anything beyond what we've already talked about? Hearing none, motion to adjourn would be appreciated.
So moved.
Is that Abbott? Moved by Abbott,
Support by Mayor.
support by Mayor. All those in favor, please say yes.
Yeah.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Meeting's adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.